Hi people, this one's quite a bit different from my other videos, but it is a subject I'm interested in, which is political geography, that is to say maps and settlements and how they're designated. It's something I've long been interested in. Maybe I should make more videos about it actually. I don't know how much traction this one will get. There's no way for me really to know what videos will get attention and what won't. I hope with this would be it would get at least 50 plus views, then I'll be happy. If it's less than that, I'll be, well, yeah, I'd like it to get a little bit of traction. So please do feel free to share, comment, and yeah, let's see where this goes. So, I want to talk about urban counties in the United Kingdom, and particularly using where I live as an example, because this is something that actually people get quite strong views on. I've just seen a post about Sunderland, where I live, and it was kind of Sunderland News. It's kind of an online social media site, and they had a map of the old County Durham, which included Sunderland and went as far north as the town of South Shields. If you're familiar with the northeast, South Shields basically touches the estuary of the River Tyne. Sunderland, we have the River Wear going through it. But basically, the situation is that since 1974, Sunderland, Newcastle upon Tyne, and other settlements in this immediate area have been part of the metropolitan county or the urban county of Tyne and Wear, so named after our two main rivers, the River Tyne and the River Wear. Now, I've been here for a quarter of a century. My family came here in 2000 from Northern Ireland, so my whole life it's been Tyne and Wear. But I always knew the County Durham connections to Sunderland, and you could definitely get that sense, certainly in the accent, the local dialects. In this part of the country, people, maybe not so much in the city of Sunderland, but certainly just to the south of Sunderland, people speak a dialect called Pitmatic, if I'm saying that correctly. It's what miners, the way miners used to speak, coal miners. So the collieries around County Durham, that's the way people spoke, and perhaps to some extent still speak. Um, there was a comedian back in the 70s called The Little Waster. People around this area got his humour, but it didn't really go beyond the northeast because people couldn't understand him. I forget the guy's name now. Yeah, it eludes me off the top of my head. He was quite popular back in the day, but like I said, never really went beyond the northeast. A little bit of history is important here regarding this area. The Local Government Act of 1888 created three metropolitan boroughs, which was Newcastle, Sunderland, and Gateshead. Now, historically, Newcastle had always been part of Northumberland, and Sunderland had long been part of County Durham. I don't think it was always part of County Durham, but it had long been associated with County Durham. Then Tynemouth joined those three in 1904 as a metropolitan borough. Via the Local Government Act of 1958, Tyneside was designated a special review area, but that didn't include Sunderland because Sunderland's not Tyneside. Basically, if you look at this area, I probably should have got out the map. But if you look at this part of the northeast, we have a little cluster of settlements close together. So we form a conurbation of about 1.1 million people. Quite big, quite densely populated. That is the cities of Newcastle upon Tyne and Sunderland, Gateshead, South Shields, and North and South Tyneside. Excuse me, I'll rephrase that. The city of Newcastle, the city of Sunderland, Gateshead, North Tyneside, and South Tyneside, which includes South Shields. And that's basically the five boroughs that make up present day Tyne and Wear. Now, the interesting thing is in that the responses in that map of old County Durham were quite belligerent towards the idea of Tyne and Wear. It was very much like, I still say Sunderland, County Durham. My address will always be County Durham. So there's quite a strong reaction here to the principle of Tyne and Wear as an urban county. And it's not for me to, people can have their own opinions. I respect the fact that people older than myself who've been here their whole lives will have a nostalgia and an affinity for being part of the old County Durham. But personally, I have no problem with being in Tyne and Wear. It doesn't, I have no issues with that. Um, and it does make sense why urban counties were created. Now, the Local Government Act of 1972 was controversial, not just here. I know that in Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire, there were controversies over some of the boundaries. In the case of West Yorkshire, that had been the historic West Riding of Yorkshire. The thing about Yorkshire, it's so big as a county that it's basically the only county in the United Kingdom that is a region in its own right. So big that it has to be subdivided into North Yorkshire, West Yorkshire. I believe East Yorkshire's been restored and South Yorkshire, but they were traditionally the North Riding, the West Riding, the East Riding. I suppose Lincolnshire has somewhat got this situation because it's also a pretty big county by area, and it had the historic kind of sub-counties of Holland and Kesteven. Um, and I suppose you could say Cumbria had been Cumberland and Westmoreland, which no longer formally exist. Um, I believe England has about 42 or 45 counties, ceremonial counties. That includes traditional counties like Shropshire, Lancashire, Dorset, Devon, Kent, but also these metropolitan counties created in 1974 via the Government Act of 1972. So Tyne and Wear, Greater Manchester, Merseyside, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire. Humberside existed for a while. I think it's back to East Yorkshire now. Greater London's a bit different. It was older. I think it was created in about the 1930s, if I've got that right. The city of Bristol's a bit different. The city of Bristol had always been a county in its own right, going way back to when it was essentially the second city. The West Midlands, and this one causes confusion because there's the West Midlands region, which is a whole region, and then there's the West Midlands County, which is the city of Birmingham, plus Solihull, Sandwell and Dudley. There's no town called Sandwell. The city of Wolverhampton, where I lived, well, where I studied for 2 years. Dudley, West Bromwich, Walsall, yeah, and those metropolitan boroughs together form the West Midlands County, which is these days it's probably about 3 million people, similar to Greater Manchester. So that's a little breakdown. In the case of Belfast, there was never really a Greater Belfast, but there's large towns around Belfast, such as Lisburn and Newtonabbey. In the case of Belfast, there's a city of Belfast, but basically South Belfast always sort of overlapped into County Down, and North Belfast overlapped into County Antrim. In the case of Glasgow, that's a bit confusing because it's the city of Glasgow, and then Glasgow suburbs go into numerous small counties such as North Lanarkshire, and I believe North Ayrshire touches that, East and West Renfrewshire, and then I think there's a few others. So that's kind of a jigsaw there. The city of Edinburgh, I think, was always somewhat independent, although it's associated with the Lothian counties. There's still cities that are part of their historic county. For example, Nottingham, Nottinghamshire, Oxford, Oxfordshire, Leicester, Leicestershire. So that still is the case in those situations. But anyway, what I'm driving at here is the creation of metropolitan districts and metropolitan counties was controversial. I know in Greater London, there are people, for example, in places like, let me get this right, Romford, which today is part of Greater London, they will still say Romford, Essex. Or, let's say, Richmond upon Thames. People there might still associate themselves more with Surrey than with London. Thurrock and Medway were created counties or unitary districts, I think they're classed as. I mean, all of this is, if you were part of a historic county, I can understand it being a bit galling to suddenly have a new name. But in the case of Tyne and Wear, we're now talking about half a century. It's not like something that happened just yesterday. I understand older people don't like it, and I respect their opinion. But for me personally, I have no objections to it, and I don't think it would make much sense going back to County Durham now. I mean, some businesses, City X, the discount DVD games shop, it's still right on the receipts. Sunderland, County Durham. I'm honestly okay with Tyne and Wear. I don't think it's nonsensical. I mean, it's named after two rivers. There is geographical context to that, and I don't think it sounds bad. I think Tyne and Wear sounds okay. I don't think it sounds. It's not an ugly name. I think it sounds all right. Um, anyway, I'd like to know people's thoughts on this. If you live in a metropolitan county, if you're in Tyne and Wear, if you're in Merseyside, if you're in Greater Manchester, if you're in North Lanarkshire, but you're in one of the Glasgow suburbs, how do you feel? You know, I haven't even mentioned South Wales. I think Cardiff is independent as a city, but you have Mid Glamorgan, I believe, on one side, and then there's smaller districts in the south of Wales. Again, they were kind of carved out of historic counties. I do understand the controversy with, old ceremonial counties being carved up, but as the population gets bigger, it makes sense to have some breakdown. I mean, in the 1930s, Lancashire had over 5 million people, second only to London. It makes sense that it had to be broken down a little bit. So for me, I do understand why somewhere like Stockport would become, part of Greater Manchester, or Birkenhead as Merseyside. Um, but that doesn't change the historic connections to those ceremonial counties. So Sunderland will always have historical connections to County Durham. Um, but Sunderland, Tyne and Wear, honestly, it doesn't bother me. This one's a bit different. Let me know where you live and how you feel about whichever county you're part of. Are you okay with it? Did you not like the change? Would you like to see it reverted back to a historic county? Maybe you're in a rural area. Maybe you're in a village in Northamptonshire or Norfolk and you're okay with your address. But this refers more really to people in urban areas. I mean, when you describe your address, if you're in Romford, do you say Romford, London, or Romford, Essex? I think most people would say Romford, Essex, although technically it is in Greater London. It's a borough of Greater London. Actually, I think Romford's part of the borough of Havering, if I've got that right. I don't know. I could be wrong on that one. But boundary changes don't come without context. There is, it's not just petty politicians deciding, oh, let's just make a change. I think population's a factor in that. So I don't think it should happen too often. And like I say, Tyne and Wear has existed for 51 years. It's not like it happened yesterday. So personally, I say Sunderland, Tyne and Wear, but I appreciate some people will get salty about that and say, no, it's County Durham. I remember one guy saying to me, Tyne and Wear doesn't exist. Now, that's just being petty. It does exist. You could say Sunderland, County Durham if you wish, but Tyne and Wear exists. So anyway, let me know your thoughts. It's certainly a different video, but something for people to think about.